Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network, so join Mary, Shirley, and Lisa Fine as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
Hi, you're listening to the Great Women in Compliance podcast on the Compliance Podcast Network with Mary, Shirley, and Lisa Fine. I'm Lisa Fine, and today I'm speaking with Lisa Beth Lentini Walker. She's a great friend of the podcast and to Mary and to me personally. She was also one of our first and most popular interviews. Since then, Lisa Beth left her in-house position, started Lumen Worldwide Endeavors, where she combines her entrepreneurial mindset to consulting and coaching. See, I told you, I always have to do it twice. Time, starting over. So I'm back to my usual routine. So I'm going to start again. Hi, you're listening to Great Women in Compliance on the Compliance Podcast Network with Mary, Shirley, and Lisa Fine. I'm Lisa Fine, and today I'm speaking with Lisa Beth Lentini Walker. She is a great friend to the podcast and also to Mary and to me personally. She was one of our first and to this day most popular interviews. Since that time, Lisa Beth left her in-house position. She started Lumen Worldwide Endeavors, and that's where she combines her entrepreneurial mindset to consulting and coaching professionals and teams in the area of risk, ethics, and compliance. She's an executive coach. She's also a mom to 4 kids. One of her other passions is mentoring and sponsoring people as they grow their careers. And in the free time that I didn't know she had, she's become one of the co-founders of MentorCore. We will hear a lot about this today. And in full disclosure, Mary and I are both a part of the MentorCore community and speakers for them. MentorCore was created to help risk and compliance professionals connect by identifying mentor relationships, sharing insights, and growing the leaders of the future. It's a unique organization, and I'm looking forward to everyone learning more about MentorCore. So with that, Lisa Beth, let's start by getting an update on you and on Lumen. How's it going? And let's talk a little bit about going from being an in-house CCO to starting your own company.
Boy, I got to tell you, thank you for the lovely introduction. And, starting a company has been amazing. One of the things that I didn't realize about myself is that there's a little bit of entrepreneurship in my blood. My grandparents, when I was growing up, were dairy farmers. And when there was a pretty significant slump in the dairy market, they actually started up their own business and were doing import-export of dairy technology and starting up milking industry across the world in places like Venezuela, in Saudi Arabia, et cetera. And I remember, being a young kid in Wisconsin, going to the farm and seeing people from all over the world, from places, as far afield as Saudi Arabia and as close as Jamaica. So I didn't really think of myself as an entrepreneur when I started this. But then somebody mentioned to me, your whole family has this in their background. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way. Running a business right now is definitely a roller coaster, but I love every minute of it. Being your own boss is definitely a double-edged sword. It's forced me to make decisions about boundaries and really enforce them because my boss is either my best friend or a wicked adversary when it's yourself, right? So, I've also had to make decisions involving personal financial risk that are much more directly impactful for my family than the risk decisions you typically make while you're in a large corporation. So it's definitely not a path for everyone. You need to be a self-starter. You need to be ready to take some significant financial risks and be willing to invest in yourself and in your idea of what you think your company or passion project or whatever it is. You also need to know what and when to find help. So for example, we made the decision at the outset to have our accounting and taxes done professionally with outside assistance. It was one of the best decisions ever. And we made similar decisions around branding and other elements of a company. So it's been a very different experience, but I've enjoyed it.
What's been the most fun so far?
For me, meeting new people is always the most fun. for any situation. And I decided really early on that I needed to expand my horizons beyond the places where all the compliance folks hang out. Don't get me wrong, I still love spending time with compliance folks because these are my people.
Don't ditch us.
Right? No, of course not. Of course not. It's more of a and situation, right? So I love to spend time with the people in compliance. And I also really like to meet people who didn't even know that they needed a compliance person in their life. And there's actually quite a few people that fit into that camp. So being able to educate people from so many different disciplines about what value we bring to the table has been just a joy.
That's fantastic. What have you seen as the biggest surprise or challenge?
Well, I think the biggest surprise and challenge are pretty similar. I have to say, I was prepared for an eventual recession or a depression. But when I started all of this, I did not think that 2020 would be the year of COVID. So I had planned on 2020 being the year of the conference booth and international speaking circuit for Lumen. And well, it was one of those situations where sometimes plans were just meant to be changed. And by early Q2, it became painfully clear that some of the investments we had made in booths and collateral were just not right for this time. So it was one of those moments where I said, okay, what's at the root of our goals? And what can we do now to meet those long-term objectives of raising awareness, being nimble, and continuing to grow? The lack of travel meant that we had a lot more time, which is a finite asset that we could put towards different efforts than we had originally envisioned. So we basically just made new plans.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess that would also go along with how COVID has impacted your business to some degree.
Yeah. So there's some trends that we're definitely seeing in the market. And from my perspective, it's a tale of two types of clients. So the common feature is all the clients are stressed and tired at this point. But the two camps that I see are the folks that are short of staff and money, and the others who are overwhelmed with work, unprepared, but rolling in money. I'm seeing a lot of burnout and people considering transitions at both types of clients. We're in the midst of witnessing what I think is a type of economic revolution. There's some amazing innovations that are starting to happen that we won't likely recognize until a few years from now. But in my view, there's a new era being born, and like any birth, it's difficult and painful, but I think ultimately it will be worth it.
Yeah, it is completely different. It'll be interesting to see everything, that's happening right now and how that impacts us when we do get back to what everyone's now calling a new normal. I don't really necessarily personally know what that is yet, but it's different than what I think any of us have ever accounted for, but, as well. So let me ask a question. You're in Minneapolis.
Yes.
And one of the things, as you know, that we've been talking about, in Great Women in Compliance, and also just generally, one thing that's important is the Black Lives Matter movement. And also you were in the area, right where George Floyd was killed. I mean, not right there, but close, and really saw everything. And we talked about it as it was going along. I just wanted to get your sense of, how are things going there, and how you're holding up.
Well, I can't speak for the whole community, but my own perspectives are there's just this intense pain, terrible grief, and loss. And there's also a sense of cognitive dissonance for me as a resident here. The Minneapolis that I thought I knew was a place where I was very proud. There was a deep sense of community, a lot of love, and the expectation for our leaders has always been that if you're a leader within this town, you're expected to give back to the community. For me personally, I loved the work that I was doing because I was working with a local children's theater and doing access and outreach and helping make the community a better space. And one of the first things that I felt was that all of the good that I saw in the community wasn't making enough of a difference. And it just clearly wasn't enough. So that was extraordinarily disheartening. And after a little bit of time, I started seeing what the community was doing to pull together. And the community that I saw living here, I don't think is portrayed in the news. What I saw after the rioting and the funeral and all of the upset was that there was a lot of support and love in this community. People came together to help support businesses, to support everyone in our community. There were food drives to help make sure that people who are in food deserts were still able to have nutrition and the care and support that they needed. So it gave me some hope for the future. I don't know what people saw outside of our community, but I think that the story about how people came together here is probably not being told externally as much as what I'm seeing.
That's really interesting too, because as you know, I live in Washington, D.C., and when there were the original beginning of the Black Lives Matter Plaza and before that and the protests and other things, early on, I got a lot of people reaching out to me saying, are you okay? Is it, are you safe? And what I saw after the first, day or so where everything is it was one of the most peaceful and almost inspiring protests here. And it was an interesting process of seeing how when people were out demonstrating, they had their masks. People were really trying to work and to help one another and really cared. And then I would speak to people in other states or other countries who would be wondering whether or not there was looting down the street from me. And really being here, I saw some really uplifting moments that I thought it was just fascinating. It made me think about some other things about all of this.
I think in Minneapolis, my perception is our entire community is going through stages of grief. And it's nonlinear, it's messy. On any given day, I think you can find someone in any stage of this process. It could be they're experiencing numbness or anger or fear or panic, isolation, loneliness, searching, whatever it is. And I don't think that here we're really through the raw stages yet, but I do see glimmers of the beauty that could emerge from it. Mm-hmm. And, in Japan, they have a process called kintsugi, which is where you take pottery that's been broken and you mend it, but in the spaces where the broken pottery is mended, you put gold or silver or platinum, and you emphasize those cracks of the pottery, but give them this beautiful repaired appearance where the crack is part of the beauty. And that makes it a more valuable piece of artwork. And I think, my hope is that for Minneapolis, there will be a mending that enhances the beauty of the community without forgetting that there was this brokenness to it.
Yeah. And again, I'm still spending a lot of time doing a lot of my own learning. I've cared about these issues, but just realizing everything I don't know or that I don't experience and things like that. And, I think it's a really important time to take stock both in any city and anywhere else. I found it, interesting for you. You really were in what the epicenter of the beginning of this process was. And I'm happy to see that, people are really committed to trying to move forward and to come out with something better and recognizing what some of the problems were that some of us may not have been encountering on a daily basis. Right. So, I think with that, though, too, in mind, one of the things that Black Lives Matter has done in my thought process and also generally was the importance of all of us coming together in any sort of community, including the mentoring and, and advocating for other people, which was one of the reasons I really wanted to speak with you right now about MentorCore. So can you tell us about it and tell us, how it's, supposed to benefit the community and organizations and individuals?
Well, so mentoring has always been something that has been near and dear to my heart because I think it's a huge differentiator in a professional life. I always wish that there were more strong mentors, even for me in my career. And I think that there are ways that we can come together as a community to help each other in a more robust way. Lots of other professions have mentoring programs and have internships or things like that allow you to connect with people who can be helpful throughout your career. I haven't seen as much of that in our profession yet. And that got a buddy of mine and I to talk. So I have a dear friend of mine who I've known since I was 12 or 13 years old. His name is Dan, and we both grew up in Wisconsin, but he was on the information security IT side of the house. So I always called him Dan, the computer man. Don't tell him that, but
I can't promise no one else listening won't tell him that, but, or if he listens himself, but we'll keep it to ourselves here.
But so we've been friends forever, and we were so extraordinarily fortunate because our careers ended up being very similar, right? He was at a big company, traveling the world, doing his thing. I was at a big company, traveling the world, doing my thing. And eventually we ended up both starting our consulting practices around the same time. So our paths were very parallel in very many ways. But we could always count on each other to bounce ideas off of and get different perspectives. And we started talking about how much certain areas, particularly privacy, were converging in our worlds. And we said, there really just isn't enough of a way for people to come together right now and find mentors and find sponsors and find people to help them grow and develop, not just technical skills, because technical skills are pretty straightforward and can be taught, but the core emotional competencies that allow you to thrive in your career. So I personally think that there needs to be a lot more focus on those soft skills that your company isn't necessarily teaching you, and you may not be able to find somebody to help you without asking. And mentoring is a kind of a little bit of an awkward dance because you don't want to feel like you're back in first grade saying, will you please be my mentor? Click yes or no, right? It shouldn't feel that awkward. So it's nice to have a group of people who say, hey, I want to help out in the community and allow people who are seeking that type of help to be able to easily connect and expand their own networks. So that's part of how MentorCore was born. And we looked at it as a place where you could meet some of the needs of the community to reduce the sense of isolation and really foster that community spirit and make sure that we're able to help this profession be more sustainable, welcoming, accessible, and inclusive. And, when we looked at the things that limit people's careers, they come down to basically three factors, right? Where you were born and what you were born into economically. The second factor is where you went to school. And the third is, have you worked for a big business? And for people who don't have access to that, we've got to create more paths and we've got to create more ways that people can help themselves.
Yeah, and to be able to make sure that those of us who are in the big organizations, or others, get the opportunity to meet some of the people who may be able to open those paths or remove certain barriers along the way.
Right, and my view is, if we're truly helping to be guardians of corporations, we can't be the cobbler's children. We need to find better ways to support and connect and include and show others how to do that.
So how do you personally define mentoring? And are there any myths about mentoring out there that you've thought about or you want to raise here?
I think there are a lot of myths around mentoring. I think that many people think that to be a mentor, you have to have a certain number of years of experience, you need to be older, but this is just not the case. Mentoring happens in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be formalized. It can be very informal. It can be somebody who says something really resonates with you. But I also think that there's been this concept that somehow mentoring is a one-way street, and it is not. It is absolutely a mutually beneficial situation. And so we want to make sure that people understand that mentoring happens in many different ways, and it happens from many different people. There may be somebody who just, started their first job last week that you could learn more from than anybody else that you might meet anywhere. So I think we want to make sure that there are voices that are being heard from throughout the community, and that those voices are honored, and that we can improve as a whole.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I feel like there's so many different kinds of mentors, and there are so many things that some people you may say, this is my mentor. There are some people who mentor in many different ways, whether it's somebody who is in a different field and you watch how they deliver a training or a class or something, and to sort of look and try to bring different skill sets in, I think is a really important thing, especially different generations look at things differently. How do you bring that in? Diversity is important. Any other myths you think of when you think about that, or is that your biggest one?
I think that's probably one of the biggest ones. I think that overall, mentoring is something that everyone seems to want and no one seems to be able to find because it's very difficult to go out there amongst the people and identify which skill sets you think that you want to be able to improve upon or get feedback on. It's also one of those things where sometimes having someone who's not so close to you that you'd feel comfortable asking them can be the most valuable perspective, because they are viewing you from a very different angle, and they may not be within your industry or within even your exact profession.
Mm-hmm. And as you're thinking about MentorCore and as it grows and other things, what are your longer term goals and objectives?
Well, we have big plans. So MentorCore is really founded on 4 pillars right now. There's mentoring, so connecting people so there isn't this awkward sense of asking someone to dance when you don't know if they're really interested. We want to bring people together to network and to meet people outside of their current sphere of reference. So really expanding the horizons for people. We also are hosting events each week, and they're free, and they vary dramatically. Everything from how to manage digital well-being in the pandemic to how to navigate a matrixed organization, and even things like how to pivot in your career. But they're really focused on navigating a career, not just technical knowledge. It's the life part and the professional life part of people's existence. We have a community-only discussion area, and we're working on a number of masterminds for people who want to continue to grow and develop their personal brand, their professional brand, et cetera. And then we also offer ways for people to connect, to understand more about their own emotional intelligence and find their path towards professional development.
Yeah.
So they're big goals. And, part of what we're trying to do is changing the way we interact in the profession, because we think that there can be better outcomes if people pay attention to the humanness and the humanity of our community. There are plenty of resources out there to help with the technical parts of the profession. But right now, I think in this economic revolution, we are transforming a lot of what we're doing into an artificial intelligence world, and we have to become more agile, because that's going to be valued, and emotional intelligence and how you navigate your career is going to become essential too.
Yeah. And what made you decide now was the time, especially, with, as you mentioned before, all of the things going on in the world? What made you think, all right, this is the time?
I think there's never perfect timing for anything, but I also took the approach of why not? Dan and I had been talking about this for a couple of months, and as the pandemic started, I finally said to him, we've been talking about this. We just need to launch. It's a time of rapid change right now, and we think that the environment's really ripe for innovation and reinvention, and that people in our profession are yearning for that too. And we also see that a lot of companies are just not investing in people within the profession the way that we would like. And so if we're both feeling this way, we thought, we need to provide some options to individuals to choose how they're going to drive their own growth and development, because you don't have to wait on a company to decide that you're worth investing in. You get to make that call yourself. And I think that that's going to be a trend that we're going to see over the next couple of months and years.
Yeah, and one part that has been appealing to me is the fact that you are trying to make things very inexpensive so that you're taking an economic barrier. One of the things that is expensive sometimes is being able to start attending conferences or places where there is traditional networking.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure that our community was accessible so that it wouldn't break the bank, and that people who might not have personal wealth to be investing in, in these ways could still be able to afford to participate and wouldn't have to have the expense of travel and all of the other things that go with going to conferences necessarily.
Yeah, I think that that's fantastic, because if we're trying to expand the community, which is important to all of us, for ethics, compliance, risk, all of it, making sure that you're expanding the group and the involvement, I think, is really important. And I think that this time at home has emphasized that to me.
Well, and we also think it's really important to honor voices that have not been heard as often, whether that's because you're an introvert and you're living in a conference environment, which tends to be an extrovert's universe, or because you just haven't had access. We think that there are lots of voices that need to be heard, and we want to help provide a platform for that in a way that feels comfortable for everyone.
Yeah, it's so important, and it's something I've actually been thinking about a lot as well. Is making sure that you have as many voices heard, because it's the right thing, and also from, as some others have spoken recently on the podcast, from a risks perspective, from an understanding your organization perspective, or looking at the big picture. So with that, what do you want to see for MentorCore over the next 6 months, a year, 3 years, other than taking over the world?
I think right now we're still working in 30-day sprints. And I think that actually most companies are still working in 30 to 60-day sprints, because the environment that we're in doesn't lend itself particularly well to extremely long-haul thinking. But we have our speakers scheduled for the rest of the year, which considering we're doing that every week, I'm still a little bit pinching myself that this has happened and come together so beautifully. And we're planning our first networking event this fall. So in a year, I would like to see our newsletter reaching thousands rather than hundreds of people. And it would be great to have the support of more members who are interested in being involved in this collaborative community. In 3 years, if I had to venture a guess, we do hope that MentorCore is one of the places to connect and control the destiny of your career. And we have lots of interesting ideas and affiliations and partnerships in the work, but it's just a little too early to go into too much detail, but you should stay tuned.
Well, with that in mind, spoiler alert, how do we get more involved and find out about some of the things that you're not talking about today on the podcast? So we're not breaking, no more breaking news today, but how do we get involved?
One of the things is we're always looking for speakers with interesting perspectives. And while we've already got our 2020 lineup set up, if you feel like you have an interesting perspective that you want to share with the world, then reach out to us. If you feel like you would like to give back to the community and be a mentor, or you're looking for a mentor, connect with us on our website. Listen into our sessions. We love it when people ask great questions. So one of the things you should know about our events is there is ongoing chat and Q&A, and we get some of the most phenomenal questions that we answer during the live session. So we love that. We encourage that. We want people to feel like they can ask any question and not have to worry. And then, to the extent that you're willing to, I want to hear what you value and what you want to see for the future, because this is a passion of mine to try to bring together people and find healthier and better outcomes for our community. If that's something that you share, I definitely want to talk to you.
Yeah. And for those of you who aren't sure what you think about your viewpoint, it's something you should share. It's important to hear from as many people as possible for us at the podcast and for MentorCore, so that any of us can help support that in the future.
Yeah.
And it's really amazing that you've got your whole list already settled for the rest of the year. That is amazing.
I literally am pinching myself because I feel so fortunate that I am part of a community that has so many wonderful people and has so many wonderful voices to share. And I think that the more we can hear each other and connect with each other, the better. You guys at the Great Women in Compliance podcast have been doing such astounding work and bringing together so many people. I've met so many people through the work that you're doing, and you've highlighted folks from all over. So you've done such a wonderful work for this community. It's really fascinating to watch and truly a blessing on this community.
Well, I didn't invite you here to say that, but I appreciate it a ton. And I feel very fortunate to have the community, and those of you who listen regularly would know that I really feel that way, because Mary and I get so much more out of all of this, and I got to know you better through this and through other things. And, with that, I'm just going to say thank you and how much I appreciate you coming back on the podcast to talk to us about what you're doing. And for those of you, when we write about this, we'll make sure you see the website, and please reach out. We're thrilled. And thank you, Lisa Beth, for joining me.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.